Have you ever played a game of Mario Kart 8 online and nearly everyone in the lobby is using Waluigi riding on the Wild Wiggler with roller wheels? I know I have. Well, the reason this build is so popular is because it is regarded by many Mario Kart players to be the best combination of character, kart, and wheels in the game. And this conclusion is based on none other than the stats that these three individual customization options were given by Nintendo. If you're familiar with any of Nintendo's many casual sports or party games, you no doubt know that Nintendo has a bit of an obsession when it comes to adding stats to their games. Games you wouldn't necessarily associate with stat-based gameplay like Mario Party have even been infected by this obsession in recent years, and in my opinion is starting to get a bit out of hand. However, that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy stat-based gameplay. That's just not true. There are, of course, many things that I dislike about stat-based gameplay, but there are also many things that I absolutely love about it. And in this video, I'm going to go over what I believe to be the major pros and cons of this style of gameplay, as well as Nintendo's obsession with it. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the obvious major plus of stat-based gameplay, that is that individualized stats make games more fun. And this is undeniably true in my opinion. Stats bring things like variety and unpredictability to a game, which more often than not makes them very wacky and zany, and that is something that many people seem to find a lot of fun. Let's look at a very basic example of this. In the Mario Party series, stats weren't a thing up until Super Mario Party on the Switch, at least to my knowledge. The stats, or I guess stat, that Nintendo implemented into that game were the different dice blocks that each individual character now has. You no longer just have a typical 1 to 6 dice, you also have a character-specific dice that can have anything from 10s to plus or minus coins on its various sides. And speaking from personal experience here, this addition of personalized dice does make the gameplay much more unpredictable and fun in many cases. I remember one specific game I played recently where my brother was using Bowser in hopes of getting that sweet 10, but ended up repeatedly getting minus coins for almost the entirety of the game. He barely moved from start to finish and of course lost the game, but we found it exceedingly hilarious. Now obviously my brother never played Bowser again, but it was nevertheless a very fun experience thanks to the unpredictability of stat-based gameplay. However, in my opinion, this unpredictability or differentiation brought about by stat-based gameplay can be something of a double-edged sword. Which leads us to the first major negative that stat-based gameplay brings to the table: homogenization. Like we just went over, stat-based gameplay brings variety to a game by differentiating each character or item from the rest. This allows players to pick and choose what they want to play based on their personal tastes and just generally brings more meaningful choice to a game. However, that is only true if you're someone who doesn't care about optimization. Just based on the way that stat-based gameplay has to be implemented into a game, there will always be some character or build that is considered the best of the best. This is why nearly every Nintendo game that features stats has a tier list associated with it. To go back to my earlier example about Mario Kart 8, that game has so much player choice and customization available, but there's still one build that is considered the best. If you're playing a game against players of the same skill level as you, and they're using the Waluigi Wiggler combo and you're not, you will lose more often than not. That's why we see so many people online playing what is considered to be the best setup. Now, of course, it is rare that you'll play against someone of your exact skill level who gets the same RNG as you and drives the exact same line as you, but even still, so many people opt for the best possible build because that's what is considered optimal. So in the end, rather than bring more variety to a game, stat-based gameplay more often than not ends up homogenizing the experience, especially at a high level of gameplay. In my opinion, this is a real deal breaker. I know that for me, I'd much rather have the ability to choose my character based on my likes and dislikes than what is considered good in the game. I don't want to play Waluigi, I want to play King Boo or Koopa or Isabelle, but I feel like I can't because they're not the optimal choice. Now, I'm sure there are many of you out there that won't care about what's optimal and what isn't, but for me personally, I always feel like I have to pick what's best, and I'm sure there are many others out there like me as well. It's an unfortunate side effect of stat-based gameplay, and as far as I know, there's nothing you can do to alleviate this problem other than remove stats from cosmetic choices altogether. The next pro is something that doesn't really apply to me personally, but I'm sure it is something very important to many people, and that is individuality. Like I just said, I usually feel like I have to optimize my selections in stat-based games, but that isn't the case for many people. For people that don't care about optimization or playing what's considered the best, stat-based gameplay brings a great opportunity for personal expression and individuality. I'll admit I have thrown caution to the wind and made selections in stat-based games based on my personal desires on occasion, and it can be a lot of fun, especially in games where stats aren't so cut and dry. Coming up with builds and character choices that you enjoy or you have some personal attraction to is a great way to express yourself in a game, and that is definitely something that should be considered when looking at what makes stat-based gameplay a good choice for a game. This is especially true when the game in question is targeted at a younger audience. As we all know, kids love to play games their way and on their terms, and implementing some sort of stat-based framework to facilitate that is a great way to make a game fun for kids, in my opinion. Based on my personal experiences, a series that does this very well is Pokemon. Giving the player the ability to make a team of 6 of their favorite Pokemon really gets a kid's creativity flowing. And since each individual Pokemon is so unique in terms of both stats and appearance, kids' imaginations can run wild when creating a team. If a kid wants to make a team of all Bidoofs, they can do that. If a kid wants to use only Fire type because that's their favorite, they can do that. If a kid wants to use only first evolutions because they're the cutest, they can do that. This level of freedom and choice is all facilitated by the stat-based framework in place in the many games in the Pokemon series, and in my opinion that's one of the big reasons they're so popular with kids. Another con of stat-based gameplay, in my opinion, is that it gives players who know about the optimal choices in a game an unfair advantage over those who don't. Let's say, for example, I go over to my friend's house and he invites me to play a game of Super Smash Bros. Melee, his absolute favorite. Little does he know, I did some research on Melee beforehand and found out that Marth is a very good character. When it comes time to pick characters, he picks his favorite character from the Zelda series, Ganondorf, and I pick Marth. If you assume we both have the same skill level and familiarity with the game, I will win more often than not due to Marth's great advantage over Ganondorf. Now, of course, there are many other factors to consider here, but just on an average wins basis, I believe Marth would win out in the end. That may not have been the best example, but I think you guys get what I'm trying to say here. Having the knowledge of what characters or builds are considered optimal in a stat-based game can give someone a great advantage over someone who does not have this knowledge. That doesn't mean that they'll always win, but they do have a greater chance of winning when compared to someone who doesn't have that knowledge. And this can be a very frustrating thing to experience. No one likes losing a game, that's just a fact. And losing over and over again simply because you don't know or care to use what's considered the best is not fun. This leads to frustrated players looking up what is best and choosing that over what they enjoy or aesthetically like, further homogenizing the game, and eventually you end up with a lobby full of Waluigis riding Wigglers. So even if you don't care about optimization, you may resort to it out of frustration. Alright, now for the last positive point of stat-based gameplay that we're going to talk about in this video, the attachment players can form to characters and builds. Just based on the nature of how stat-based games have to be built, each individual character or part of a build is usually quite different from the rest. This allows players to form an attachment to a certain character or build. In Smash terms, that would be your main or the character you enjoy playing the most. It is of course possible to form an attachment to a character in a game that doesn't use stats, but in my opinion it is much easier for such a bond to form if a specific character stands out more from the rest. Having a main or a character you identify with is something that I personally do enjoy about stat-based games, and I think the same can be said for many people out there as well, especially when it comes to games that we pour our hearts and souls into. Take, for example, esports players who are associated with one specific character. That character almost becomes a part of their personality to the viewer, and when we see that character, we often think of that player they're associated with. If you're a Smash fan, think Hungrybox and Puff or Axe and Pikachu. But even on an individual level, finding a character you like and maining them is always a fun experience. However, this is only possible for someone who likes optimization like me, if the game has been balanced well enough to make most characters viable, which is no easy task. And that just so happens to be our last negative point. That is, the fact that stat-based games are very often extremely hard to balance. Take, for example, a game I just reviewed, WarioWare Get It Together. The characters in that game are all different in terms of their stats and abilities, but there are some characters who are clearly better than others. and this imbalance is apparent even to someone who just picked up the game and played it for a few moments. It's hard to make each character unique while also trying to keep things relatively balanced, and that's one of the main things that leads us to a game with a correct answer when it comes to what you should be playing to win. Now, it is possible to make a game that's completely balanced or where the imbalance doesn't matter, but more often than not, developers, Nintendo specifically, choose to leave things in a state of imbalance that does affect gameplay. Why would they do this? Well, that's part of what we're going to talk about next with Nintendo's obsession with stat-based gameplay. So, why is Nintendo obsessed with making games that feature stat-based frameworks? Well, take a look at the pros and cons I laid out. The pros, where stats make games more fun and wacky thanks to variety. Stat-based games let players express themselves, and stat-based frameworks help facilitate attachment between character and player. The cons, where optimization makes stat-based games become very homogenized. Knowledge about the optimal strategy makes the game unfair to those who don't research, and they're very hard to balance. So, from Nintendo's point of view, the cons don't really matter. Nintendo makes games for the whole family, casual games if you will. They don't care if a game can be optimized or if it's unbalanced. They care the most about what the average person is going to consider fun. And for the most part, wacky, zany, and unpredictable games are very fun to play if you don't care about optimization. Nintendo's goal has never been to make a wholly competitive game that is balanced to an almost perfect degree. They've made that abundantly clear many times in the past. Even games that do have an official Nintendo competitive circuit are very often unbalanced, and that should show you where their priorities really lie. It is of course possible to make a game that doesn't rely on stats and is therefore very balanced, fun, but at least as far as I can tell in terms of casual and party games, that is much harder to do. Taking Mario Party for example, the addition of character dice made the game more fun in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying I think the games that don't have character dice are less fun in general, I'm just talking about the dice rolling aspect of the game here. So if the previous Mario Party games had character dice, they would be more fun thanks to the added fun from the unpredictability of the dice. It's very hard to make up for the unpredictability and variety of stat-based gameplay, so that's why Nintendo so often utilizes the framework. But here's where we hit the major problem that I personally have with Nintendo's implementation of stat-based gameplay in their games. That is, that the stats in question don't necessarily have to be applied to cosmetic choices. Let's look at Mario Golf Super Rush as an example. In that game, the character you pick determines things like drive distance, run speed, stamina, so on and so forth. But why not make those stats adjustable by the player in some way? That way, you can pick any character you want without having to worry about what's optimal, while still keeping the variety and fun of stat-based gameplay at the same level. Why connect cosmetic choice to gameplay? Of course, there are certain genres like fighting games where this approach probably wouldn't fly, but for Nintendo's party and casual games, I feel like it would work perfectly. You can let players pick their dice in Mario Party, make stats freely adjustable in Mario Kart, and let you pick abilities for characters in WarioWare. I understand that there are some elements of stat-based gameplay, like character individuality, that you'd lose by implementing the framework in this way, but I'm not saying they have to do every game this way. Maybe try it once and see how it turns out. If it works well, make some games this way, some games the traditional way, and maybe even some games with no stat-based framework. Just mix things up a bit, because it's gotten to the point where nearly every casual game Nintendo releases follows the exact same stat framework, and it's getting a bit overdone, in my opinion. But okay, I think that just about wraps up my thoughts on Nintendo's stat obsession. I know this was a pretty random and specific topic, but it's something that's been on my mind for a while now, and I really wanted to make a video about it. Thanks for coming along for the ride. If you guys have any opinions on stat-based gameplay, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. Also, if you did enjoy today's video, consider giving it a like. It's always greatly appreciated and helps me out a ton. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Hack out. This whole video just boils down to, look how stupid Waluigi and the Wiggler bike looks. Like, look, it looks so stupid. I don't want to play that. Let me play something else. I don't want to play this stupid Waluigi on the Wiggler bike. Come on, please, Nintendo.